Hello and welcome to our Q&A series with the founder of the Orangutan Project, Leif Cocks. This week, we are going to focus on the questions that have been coming in about the orangutan species itself. So we're going to focus on Leif's skills as a primatologist, and I have about 4 questions that people have asked over the last couple of weeks. So here we go, Leif. First question has come in from a recent webinar, and the question is, it's from Tanya, sorry. The question is from Tanya. Leif, in a recent webinar, you mentioned one of the gravest issues affecting orangutan survival is their very low birth rates. Mm-hmm. Why has nature allowed that to occur? And are any other primates like that?
Yeah, no, it's an extremely good question, because animals can adapt to the environment in 2 ways. And one is natural selection, and that's what we commonly have been taught. For example, a tiger will have lots of offspring over its lifetime, and each of those offspring will be genetically a little bit different. And nature will select which offspring is most adapted for the changing environment. So that's how natural selection actually works. But a few species, such as us, orangutans, and elephants, as some examples, have decided we actually have a better way. We adapt to the environment through culture, and we can adapt far more quickly than natural selection of genes can do alone. And so what happens, we become intelligent. Our babies are born with vacant brains, that we program the culture from the mother and the parents into the baby, so the baby is particularly adapted culturally to the environment. Now, this can only occur when there is no natural predator. Because now you're investing very heavily in few offspring, because instead of just having offspring and just releasing them to the jungle to survive after a short period, you have to spend a lot of time. And orangutans are the slowest reproducing species in the world. They nurse their infants, suckling for 8 years, and there's 15 years between individual birth intervals for, let's say, the Sumatran orangutan. And so you see they're concentrating heavily into few offspring for them to become maximum ability to survive, far better than natural selection alone. The trouble is, when this system gets put out of whack, when there's a super predator such as humans come along, and we start just killing at least only 1% of the females in the population, that population will spiral to extinction. So it's how we adapt to the environment, it's how orangutans adapt to the environment, predominantly by culture, and a lot less by natural selection. However, this makes us very vulnerable when a super predator such as humans come along.
Thank you. It's very sad, isn't it? This is a question that's similar, I think, and it's from Andrew, but I think he's looking at it from the male perspective. He says, "Hi Leif, I was at a recent talk of yours in Perth, and you mentioned an issue with alpha male orangutans affecting their remaining gene pool." Mm-hmm. I cannot imagine what he's talking about.
Well, in any genetic situation, in any population, especially when it becomes small, each time you breed, you lose genes. And therefore you want to have a population size where the random genetic mutations are equal to the genetic loss from the breeding, because we never truly pass on all our genes to the next generation. And that keeps the genetic diversity and the health of the population alive. Now, what happens when you have social systems such as the orangutans? The big adult males will have 50% of the genetic contribution of the next generation area, and all the subadult males put together will share the remaining 50%. Yeah, and so the genetic contribution of these big males is heavily skewed in their favor, and that's why they compete to become these big males, because it's such a genetic advantage. But what this means is, instead of, for example, let's say gibbons, who you have these monogamous pairs that breed in pairs, you probably can get away with 500 gibbons in a particular area and it'd be genetically viable, because they're very even founder representation in each generation. But with orangutans, it's heavily secured to these few really big adult males, in which case we estimate we need about 2,000 orangutans in one population for it to remain genetically viable and not lose genetic diversity over time. And so that's why big males produce the unfortunate reality that we have to conserve larger number of the orangutans for them to survive.
And again, given that they're in the same environment as gibbons naturally, but it was all working fine when they had enough habitat. Is that right? It's just the issue is now everything has shrunk.
Exactly, because when, before man started coming along destroying them, and also in the last literally 20 years where we've destroyed 80% of the forest home, the numbers were so large, 100,000 orangutans, 200,000 orangutans, that these sorts of problems were just never a situation for natural orangutans. It's unfortunately now we're fighting over the scraps of remaining rainforest and the last possibility of peacefully getting viable ecosystems that can sustain 2,000 or more orangutans that these issues are coming up.
Thank you. Okay, this is still about, we will need your skills as a primatologist, but a completely different question. Hi Leif, I noticed in an adoption update recently that 2 orangutans were released together because they were friends. But when the trackers arrived back in the morning, one orangutan had waited until the trackers left and then had stolen her friend's nest because it was better than her nest. Mm-hmm. That seems out of character to me. I thought orangutans were meant to be noble and kind.
Well, they're noble and kind, but they're persons, and they're and as range of individuals, which we call orangutans, they have the same variation. You have some extremely benevolent and kind orangutans, and you have occasionally you get ones which are jerks. That's how persons are across the range. In general, I characterize orangutans as a more noble form of persons than humans. So on average, your average orangutan is so much more kinder and conciliatory than the average human being. And I give one of the great examples is I watched a subadult male unrelated to a baby orangutan. So subadult males have really no natural interest in babies, and they certainly don't have any interest in a lone unrelated baby. But this subadult male was carrying and helping this baby travel through the rainforest. And so from an evolution genetic point of view, you would say, well, this just doesn't make sense. There's no genetic or evolutionary advantage for the subadult male to do this. But why are they doing it? Well, because it's a person, and some persons are kind and care, beyond the constraints of natural selection, and similar to humans, we've kind of evolved past, doesn't make sense, being just animals trying to survive on the savannah. We've become something far greater, and it has the potential to so much greater. And orangutans have done this too, and certainly we see that in these noble persons that share our planet.
And I suppose, could you say that the orangutan who stole the nest from her friend doesn't mean that she's a jerk always? She just, at that moment, had a bit of a selfish moment, like she perhaps shared her fruit the next day. I guess they're not one-dimensional in the same way we're not.
Exactly. It is a jerk at work. It could be the most kindest and loving father at home, or or vice versa, So, to stereotype people and put them into slots is it's good for joking around, but we really have to look at both orangutans as persons and other human beings in the whole nature and take them for the entirety of who they are.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That was extremely entertaining. If you would like to give a donation to support any of the crazy work that you've heard about today, visit www.theorangutanproject.org. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.